Hey guys and gals, Vlad here with AVT-Astro, and today we are talking about SCTs. For those of you that might not be familiar, I run a little Astro blog called AVT-Astro.com, and of course this YouTube channel, so if you're not subscribed, please do consider subscribing. Over the years, I've had the privilege of owning over 100 scopes, more accessories than I could count, and having said all that, let's get down to the topic of this video. Alrighty guys, so I hope that you guys don't mind that I sit down for the rest of the video at my old age. But anyway, what inspired me to make this video is that I recently purchased my dream scope, hopefully the last one. It's a 16-inch Meade advanced coma free. It's an RCX 400, deforked as you can see, so I'm still working on this guy as far as actually getting it to be able to run in my observatory, and I don't even have a mount for it. But anyway, down to the topic of the video. So currently I have, like I said, the 16-inch Meade SCT. I've got a C14, so Celestron 14-inch. This is my trusty old Meade 12-inch advanced coma free. The scope that I've featured in several of my videos, running out at the observatory usually. C11, this is a Meade 8-inch, and the C6, so 6-inch Celestron telescope. So a pretty wide range of telescopes in SCTs. And before we get into kind of how I feel these compare visually, or even for astrophotography / EAA, I want to cover a couple of common terminologies that are used with SCTs, just in case you're kind of new to the SCT game. And then, kind of talk about a little bit more about the difference between Meade and Celestron just in general. Alrighty guys, so starting with optics. So there's basically with both Meade, Celestron, there's two different types of coatings. Now we're talking about if you're buying these used, if you're buying them new, all of the newer, well at this point it's going to be just Celestrons that are available new, really. Meade's, Meade is out of business at this point, which we'll kind of touch on later. But Celestron, they're all going to have the newer Starbright XLT coatings. With the Meade equivalent, they are called the UHTC coatings. Basically, they're a higher performance coating that, basically it's claimed that they give you up to a 16% increase in brightness by basically essentially letting more light through your corrector plate, not having to, kind of bounce off. Typically, most people, kind of think in the real world, it's more of a 10% difference. Doesn't make a difference in the real world. I've compared scopes that I've had, let's say, especially with C8s, because I've had a bunch of C8s over the years, of an XLT model versus Starbright model. I mean, you could probably tell a little bit of difference on really dim deep sky objects. But really, guys, not a huge difference. Given the choice, though, I would definitely prefer the newer coatings. Plus, it's going to be a newer scope, so chances are the mirror, reflectivity is going to be better in that type of deal as well. So coatings, newer ones are better. If you get a great deal on an older scope, this is a Meade 8-inch that does not have the UHTC coating, still a fine scope, really nothing wrong with this. So, kind of depend on your budget, yeah. Okay, optical design. I will say, guys, SCTs, they haven't changed substantially, in 40 years or something like that. So basically, the design, whether it's a Celestron or a Meade, is more or less the same. So there's a mirror here, there's a corrector plate in the front, there's a secondary mirror that kind of bounces the light off. The newer tubes with Celestron, you're going to be looking at the Edge HD tubes. With the Meade, it's the Advanced Coma Freeze. Basically, what that does is it just gives you a flatter field if you're doing astrophotography with larger size camera sizes. So if you've got a small camera size sensor, it's really not going to matter at all. It also makes a difference with really wide field of view eyepieces. So if you use 100-degree field of view eyepieces, it does make a difference. Basically, stars will just kind of look more like pinpoints and not like comets, kind of further out from the field of view. So it really kind of depends what you're using the scope for. Let's say if you're a planetary guy, you enjoy looking at the moon and all you're using is 50-degree eyepieces, or let's say if you're just imaging the planets, for instance, because you don't really need a big sensor for that at all. Quite frankly, guys, save the money and just buy the regular, either Meade or Celestron. It'd be called the XLT tube. It's like this guy right here that does not have the HD optics. Okay, kind of working up the tube, or I guess towards the back of the tube, depending on how you're looking at it. Next thing we'll get to is focusers. So both Celestron and Meade, the SCTs, they use the same type of focuser. Basically, this little knob right here rotates. And what that does is it moves the mirror up and down. Now, while I'm on the focuser subject, one other thing that can vary from, like some SCTs is that some of them will have a mirror lock built in, such as my Meade 12-inch advanced chroma-free. So basically, you could turn this knob and it essentially locks the mirror down to where it won't tilt, and that's only important for astrophotography. So if you're doing long exposure astrophotography, the mirror lock is a nice feature. Not all of the scopes will have it. So like the new Celestron Edge HDs will have that. Some of the Meades will have it. It's just called mirror lock. If you're doing long exposures, that might be an important thing for you. And kind of, continuing on the focuser type of, deal. So like this, my Meade has a feather touch focuser upgrade. This is a lot nicer and smoother than just like the stock diagonal, or not diagonals, the stock focusers on these. And that also has a 2-speed control, so that's really nice. Now, if you want to take it one step forward, or not forward, further, and basically, if you're, especially like doing imaging, or even like planetary, like at high powers, this is really helpful. You can attach an external focuser to the back of any of these scopes. And like this is actually an electric focuser, so that way I could, very finely adjust the focus, by holding the controller instead of touching, a knob and kind of shaking the scope itself. So this is primarily for either high power visual observing, or definitely handy for astrophotography or EA or something like that. Alrighty guys, and then one other quick thing that I wanted to mention that can be very important if you're doing astrophotography or EAA is that Celestron telescopes are faster compatible, or at least, some of them are, such as this guy right here. So basically, what does a fast star do? Well, it allows you to remove the secondary mirror. Essentially, what you do is you unscrew this big old nut here, pull out the secondary, and then you could run a hyperstar. It's basically like an optical corrector that allows you to attach the camera directly to it and achieve a super fast f2 focal ratio. So really fast exposures, for either EAA or astrophotography, and it gives you a really wide field of view actually with a very large telescope. So that is pretty cool. And that is not an option on Meade's at all. So if that's something that you consider to be important, then you definitely want to do a Celestron scope. Okay, and I feel like that kind of covers like the important terminology anyway that you might encounter when you're kind of shopping around for these. Now, what do I think about like Meade versus Celestron? Again, like at this point, Meade is out of business, so you're not going to be buying one of these new, you're going to be buying it used. Interestingly enough, I buy and sell a lot of, astronomy equipment. Just kind of weird, and I enjoy doing that. But anyway, so I've been, the stuff that I've been selling that's Meade, even like smaller stuff like a Meade diagonal or something like that. People are like, oh my goodness, Meade's out of business. There's no support or, that type of deal for it. Guys, so the warranty on these scopes from the factory, I think it was like from 1 to 3 years. Honestly, I'm not really sure because I would never warranty anything on this. I like personally, to me, on the SCT OTA, I really do not see what you would need to use the warranty on, quite frankly. I mean, some of them, like if they happen to have like electronics built in, like the RCXs, those did have issues. So, but that's an exception. Usually the tube itself, you really shouldn't have any type of thing that's going on that would need a warranty anyway. Now, if you're talking about the mount, like if you had one of these on the LX200 mount, that's a completely different story. The electronics can fail on those. Here we're just talking about the OTAs. So to me, like the fact that Meade's out of business, like to me, that's not a negative at all. Buying one of these used. Now, kind of on the subject of Meade versus Celestron, over the years I've had quite a few of both of the brand scopes. I would say generally, this is with a sample size of probably like, I don't know, like 30, 40 SCTs at all, at least. I mean, like as you see, there's 6 of them right here, right? I would say that I have had better quality optics on average with Celestron SCTs, especially in their Edge HD models. Very sharp optics. Now that's not to say that Meades are all bad. Like this Meade 12-inch advanced coma frame that I currently own, I mean, it's got almost refractor-like optics. I mean, very, very good optics. So with SCTs, I'd say it's always luck of the draw. Some of them are really good, some of them are not so good, and some, you know, I've heard of like really, really poor examples. I've never really owned a really poor example. So, you know, take that for what it is, but I think they're all pretty good, and really you won't know. Well, you probably won't know just in general unless you know how to, like, you know, evaluate optics, but you probably won't know how good of an SCT you got, or, you know, whatever brand it is, until, you know, you actually start imaging with it, or, you know, visual observing through it. The other thing that's kind of brand related is that, and this is kind of, you know, transitioning into like comparing kind of like the different sizes and that type of deal of these scopes, is that generally, well, not generally, always, Meade SCTs are heavier than Celestron SCTs. Now, why is that? People actually ask me that. From what I understand, Meade SCTs, they use an oversized primary mirror that's supposed to kind of, you know, help with, you know, optical performance, I guess. Typically, just generally speaking, whether it's a DOB or an SCT mirror or whatever type of mirror, that outer edge of the mirror is usually the worst off because it'll have a turn edge or something like that. It's just harder to make that outer edge perfect. So by having an oversized mirror, technically it should give you better performance. That does make them heavier. I will say though, just generally speaking, I feel that everything's just a little bit heavier duty, like as far as, you know, the hardware on the Meades too, and that's what makes them heavier. But, you know, having said that, let's kind of transition into, like, you know, some of the sizes and weights of, you know, all these scopes, so you kind of, you know, have a, you know, basis for that. All right, I'll start at this end just because I'll kind of keep it brief here, because these are, you know, I feel like not as commonly, you know, bought of scopes. So the Meade 16-inchers, and Celestron doesn't make a 16-inch, so there's only Meades of these. They are listed at like 67 pounds for, like, if you get the LX200 version. Like this RCX, the way that it is right now, is about 90 pounds. But I haven't removed these gizmos that feel like they're about 5 pounds each. So after I remove that, this thing's probably going to be about 80 pounds. Now, having said that, I mean, it's a heavy scope. It's going to require a very big mount. Actually, so I currently run the Lesmonde G11 mounts that are rated for up to about 60 pounds, which will easily carry like a C14. For that, I'm looking for a larger mount. So anyway, yeah, these things require a huge mount. Really, this is not a one-person lift scope. I'm definitely, you know, like decently healthy, and there's no way that I'd be able to lift this onto a mount myself. Like I you know, set up a C14 easily. I could set up my Meade 7-inch Apple pretty easily, which are both about 40-pound scopes or so. This thing at, you know, like at least 80 pounds, yeah, it'd be pretty much a no-go for me. I mean, just, you know, as far as just deadlifting, so two-person lift for sure, which for me, it makes it really kind of an observatory telescope. I mean, unless you just want to take the thing to a star party once a year or something like that and set it up and, you know, look cool, then more power to you. Do it. The C14. Guys, so this thing, for the size of the scope there, or for the aperture, I guess, a lot of scope for the weight. So again, these are about 40 pounds. And, you know, when I say 40 pounds, that's like the bare OTA, kind of like it's sitting right here. So if you have your finder and diagonal and stuff, that's going to, you know, add weight. Obviously, you can remove that before you're setting it up. Like, I could fairly easily set this up myself. No issues at all. Most common mounts, like the Celestron CGE, CGM, CGXL, the Lesmonde G11, like they'll all carry this OTA easily, because again, they're usually rated for 60 pounds. This is about 40 pounds. Even with all your accessories, you're still going to be, you know, easily in that kind of weight limit. Now, I have done EAA and observed with 14-inch scopes with both Meade and Celestrons. So I will actually, I'm going to just kind of talk about the size of them, and I'll kind of compare the views and what I think, you know, is worthwhile jumps from one size to the other at the end. So stick around. All right, Meade 12-inchers. Now, here's the interesting thing. So I kind of mentioned that Meades are heavier. This 12-inch scope weighs about the same thing as this Meade 14-inch scope. So this is about a 40-pound scope as well. So take it for what it is. I love my 12-inch. Why do I not run the 14-inch at the observatory, or have I not? Unfortunately, my observatory, because I like to do visual observing, it's not quite large enough. It's only a 6x6 for me to comfortably fit in there with the scope. So with the Meade, this is about as large of a scope as I can run out at the observatory currently. That's why I've kind of stopped at this one. Again, I kind of found one with awesome optics. I love this scope. So yeah, but it is heavy, 40 pounds, same thing as the C14. So really, like, you know, assuming that funds are not an issue, yeah, the 14-inch really is, you know, like between these two, kind of the one to go for. So yeah, okay, C11. So these guys, basically about 30 pounds, so substantially lighter than those guys. Although this is kind of a curious size scope to me. Along with, I don't have a Meade 10-inch. The 10-inch Meade would actually, you know, be in the same class as this, because it actually weighs about the same as this. It weighs about 26 pounds, bare OTA weight. These are kind of interesting. So these are a little too large to run on the smaller size mounts. So like, you know, we're talking about like the AVX or the smaller Meades, like the LXD75 or something like that, because they have a 30-pound capacity. So these are a little too large for the smaller mounts. You really need almost the same size mount as, you know, like these scopes to run this comfortably. So again, I'll kind of get, you know, back to like comparing them views wise and like, you know, performance wise. So this at 30 pounds though, I do feel it's kind of, it is a lot easier to set up than the 40-pound scope. So you know, if you have like a battered back or you know, age is a factor, I do feel like the C11 is about as big of a scope as you can set up comfortably by yourself. Okay, so next up, the CA and the 8-inch Meade scopes, right? You're like, wait, but what about the C9 1/4? The 9 1/4, guys, you know, obviously I don't have one, but I'll kind of talk about it. It's about 20 pounds compared to about 12 pounds on the 8-inchers. Overall, I'd say that if you do want to stick around with that AVX type, you know, class mount that's in 30-pound capacity, actually the C9 1/4 is a great scope because, you know, it's still, you know, reasonably within the limits of that mount, especially for visuals. For astrophotography, you'd really need more, but for EAA visual, yeah, C9 1/4, great scope. I love it. I've had several of them. Having said that though, the C8 and the Meade's a little bit heavier, but we'll kind of talk more about the C8 because it's a very common scope. Guys, I mean, 12 pounds, 8 inches of aperture. I mean, pretty much almost any mount would carry it. It's, you know, I feel like the first size scope to where you'll get some pretty darn good views of deep sky objects. If you're into EAA or astrophotography, you'll capture some beautiful images. It's a pretty good planetary scope. Overall, I mean, size-wise, yeah, this is a really, really sweet spot. And you're like, well, what about the C6? You know, does that deserve any love? So to me, guys, so the C6, it's about 10 pounds, so only like realistic, like 2 pounds lighter than this. So unless you want a just physically smaller size scope, like, you know, if size is a constraint, like, you know, you're traveling or something like that, the C6 is a good option. Otherwise, guys, like, honestly, I usually personally recommend, you know, like the 8-inchers, assuming that you're running like a GM mount, because, you know, like for those of you that are pretty sharp and you're watching my channel, you're like, but Vlad, you recommend the Nexstar 6 SC, and I do if you're running it on the 6 SC mount. That's why I recommend it, is because the OTA is a lot better matched for the 6 SC or the 8 SC mount, because they use the same exact mount. So that's why I recommend it. But generally, if you're using a different mount, go with the 8-inch. All right, so if you've stuck me around this far, thank you, and you guys have stayed for the best part. So how do the views compare in all these, or how do they compare for astrophotography? I'll just kind of cover visual, you know, kind of pretty quickly. If you want a more in-depth discussion, look at I'm looking up above, my Aperture's guide video. I kind of talked about more in depth. But basically speaking, for visual type of stuff, like these scopes will be very similar. Again, personally, unless you're running on the 6SC or 8SC mount, I do the 8-inch, so no questions asked. So after the 8-inch, let's say, because a lot of people already have the 8-inch, like what size would I go with, you know, with after that? Like would I go up to the 9 1/4, for instance, if I already have an 8-inch? Honestly, no. There's really not that much difference in the view, or if you're doing EAA or planetary or whatever. So very similar. From the 8-inch, you definitely want to stand. Same thing with the Meade 10-inch. I really want to go up to the Meade 10-inch. You'd really want to make a jump at least to the C11. And again, the reason for that is because I feel like most people can physically handle the scope fairly easily. Again, you will probably have to go up to a bigger size mount, so that is a downside with the C11. But C11, you will substantially see a better image with, you know, like deep sky objects. Everything will be a little bit brighter, have a little bit more detail. If you have one of those nights of excellent seeing and you have a especially good example of a C11, you will see more on the planets for sure, but that's assuming that you have a night of good seeing. So on the average night, you're probably really not going to see too much more on the planets, you know, between these two scopes. All right, so where to next? So let's say you do have a C11, right, and you're considering, you know, jumping up to the next size, right? Well, guys, I mean, quite frankly, quite honestly, I mean, I definitely wouldn't do a Meade like 12-inch, because, you know, an inch worth of difference really isn't going to be very much at all. You're really not going to see, you know, anything visually per se, and if you're like into EA and astrophotography. I personally would do at least the C14. The difference with this, it's not going to be as noticeable as going from like an 8 to an 11-inch. It's just kind of, you know, like physics at this point, basically. But you will see, like on those, again, really rare nights of really good seeing, more detail on the planets. If you're into imaging planetary, you know, stuff. Guys, I mean, most of the best pictures that you see of, you know, amateur astronomers imaging the planets are from C14s. So yeah, so 14-inch on deep sky, you will see a little bit more as well compared to the 11-inch. Everything, again, will just be a little bit brighter. The focal length does get pretty long on this, so you will definitely, you know, want to invest in some like really wide field eyepieces, because yeah, the focal length is pretty long on this thing already. All right, so the 16-inch, you know, where's this thing fit in? Like, why did I buy one? Why did I want one? Well, guys, so this is, I feel it kind of is like an outlier. I feel like this really, it's an observatory class instrument, because to me, like, if I can't by myself set up a scope, like, you know, chances are I'm not going to use it very often, you know. I mean, unless you happen to like be observing with your neighbor, or you got a buddy that comes over and you guys observe together or do imaging together all the time. I mean, chances are you're not going to have a second person there that will be able to help you lift this thing. So yeah, so observatory class instrument. I am planning to use it for EAA. Again, I currently use my 12-inch a lot for that. Focal length on these is actually pretty similar, because this is an f10, this is an f8. So I'm basically going to have 4 extra inches of aperture at essentially the same focal length, so faster light gathering. I do like I actually usually run this thing at f10. I don't run any reducers or anything, because I like that extra image scale. You know, like when I'm running this stuff, like these bigger SCTs for EAA, you know, I'm really into those really small planetary nebulas, small galaxies, and this gives you like a really good image scale. And of course, I'm posting in some samples for you guys right now. So anyhow, guys, if you guys have any questions, comments, or anything like that, please leave them in the thing below. If you have questions like regarding any of these specific models, I've owned pretty much any model SCT like that's mass produced anyway out there. So yeah, you know, feel free to ask. Again, if you're not subscribed, please do consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.